Hi everybody, my homies.
Oh.
How are ya? I'm Denny, in case you don't know who I am. Used to be Jess, but she changed. And I'm happily traveling and doing some things in the park in the summer and things like that. My background with Glacier National Park is that back in 2002, I wrote an 88 activity, 17 unit K through 12 curriculum for the International Peace Park when I first arrived here about 4 years after I got here. And then I also, if you ever go to the park website and you click on nature and science, I wrote all that stuff. So that was later on. But most of my experience at the park has been personal experience, and so I'm going to share a few of those stories tonight, and also talk to you a little bit about beyond the grandeur, because everybody knows when you go to Glacier National Park, it is vertical, 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 and the glaciers have really done a job on things, and it's like when we have people come from road scholar trips in the summertime, they usually their mouth hangs open pretty much for the entire way up to the top, and it's like we call Glacier Park for new people the nature's stun gun. Because they don't even really know how to react because it's so spectacular. But you all know that. Most of you have been there. This is a sophisticated group. This is not newbies. And so I'm going to be talking tonight a little bit about, in their context, about the stories behind the grandeur, as in, oh, I bet you didn't know this about that. And that's what I'm going to be talking about tonight. The problem is, some of you do know this about that, because this is the most sophisticated group I've ever worked for. But that's okay. I will insult your intelligence freely, okay? So it's grand. It's really grand. And it's also an intact system. I don't know if you know this, but everything that is in Glacier National Park in terms of wildlife has always been there, at least for the last few thousand years. Probably there were mastodons and things like that a number of thousand years ago. But lately, it's all been the same. Nothing's been taken away and nothing's been added. There's an occasional woodland caribou cruising through, and still happens probably once in a while. But that's about the only one that is sort of rare. So this is what it looks like. Here's the angel wing. Most of you probably know what that looks like. This is the angel wing off Mount Gould, and this is the Salamander Glacier, and back behind this thing is the Grinnell Glacier. This is Grinnell Lake. Some of you have been there. How many people have been there? Saw this scene. See, just about everybody here. So what I want to do is I want to talk about all those things that you might not know, and if you know them, fine. But I'm gonna pretend that you don't. So here we go. Everybody knows the charismatic megafauna, and everybody comes to the park to want to see what? Grizzly bear, of course. Here's one digging up a tourist, and wait a minute, no, it's not really digging up a tourist, and actually a lot of people think that these things are carnivores, and they're really not carnivores. They're a lot more vegetarian side of the omnivore range than anything else. The kind of things they like to dig up will be glacier lilies or cutworm moths. They like to turn over talus rocks because the cutworm moths live out on the prairie and eat all the crops that we like to eat out on the prairie. And then when it gets hot in the summertime, they got to find someplace cool to be. So they go to the alpine in Glacier and other places along the Rocky Mountain front, and they will find talus slopes and burrow under the talus slopes where they have a, lack of a better way of saying it, a group orgy, okay? And they are in that area for quite some time, and the bears know it. So they turn over these rocks and lap up high protein cutworm moths to the tune of sometimes one bear will eat 40,000 moths in a day. And so it's a big time important food for them. Sometimes they run into big swarms, and I've seen these swarms up high in the high elevations of ladybugs. lady beetles. And so that's the kind of thing they really like to eat. But the thing about bears to me is that the coolest thing about bears for me, it's not about their big and growly. I think they're coolest when they sleep, just like me. Because here's what happens when they sleep. They actually, they gorge, and you know that. It's hyperphagia, it's called, when you just eat. I'm working on that. And what they do is when they do end up going to sleep, they sleep for 5.5 months, and they don't go much of anywhere. But their kind of hibernation is a little bit less than the hibernators, like the little guys who roll into a ball, like the ground squirrels and things like that, and almost drop to the ambient temperature. They kind of stay 8, maybe 9 degrees below the ambient temperature. They're sort of groggy, but they can wake up if they need to. Well, in the den, while they're sleeping, the females will have cubs while they're sleeping. And all of this fat that they've gathered together is what they're living on for the whole time that they're in there for 5 months. So they have to eat a lot, they have to gain a lot of weight, and that whole 5 months, they're just burning fat. Here's the thing about bears that's different. Bears have a physiology that takes that fat when it gets burned and turns it into muscle tissue. So they actually eat and then burn fat all winter, and it turns into muscle tissue. This is the workout program that I want to be on. I mean, it's basically what they do is so they end up having more muscle when they come out of the sleep in the springtime than they have when they went in, which is absolutely physiologically amazing. Plus, they don't pee or poop the entire time. So all that built up toxins, urea and whatever else, gets made into muscle tissue, and that's how it all happens. Then they have cubs. The cubs are drinking milk, which is 33% butterfat compared to human milk at 3%. That's really, really nutritious, and they grow fast. They're born a pound, and then they're quite a few pounds when they come out of the den. So these guys so she's feeding these, but the babies poop. And so what she does is wakes up a little, and you have to be kind of drowsy to do this, because she eats the poop of the babies and of the cubs and turns that into muscle tissue as well. We're talking recycling to the max here. You know, sanitary districts, eat your heart out. And these guys really know what they're doing. So 5 months of sleep and I'll be fine. They also have a reputation. You know, the night of the grizzly, blah, 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 you all heard about it. And people are just really scared to be out there. I've had probably 80 encounters with grizzly bears in the years that I've been hiking in Glacier Park, Glacier Institute stuff and Glacier and Rhodes Scholar stuff, and on my own. Every single one has been polite bear, every single one. Not one growly bear, not one charge. My goal when I'm out in Glacier is to never ever surprise a bear. And if you don't surprise a bear and they know that you're coming, whether it's a curve around a cliff, whether it's thick undergrowth or whatever, if you are saying something, they know the human voice. You don't have to go, hey bear, I've heard that. Don't have to do that. You just talk, because they have good ears. An example of that would be a story that happened to me maybe 4 years ago now. I had a group of pretty good hikers for Rhodes Scholar, and you know, Rhodes Scholar people are a little bit older, but these were in pretty good shape. We went to Snyder Lakes. Anybody been to Snyder Lakes and back? Up behind Lake McDonald Lodge. And Snyder Lakes is about 5 miles in, the first lake is, and we were walking all the way in there, and we were kind of motoring because these were pretty good people. They were good hikers. We got to the top of the hill where you can look down. You look down about where the campsite is. And there's a campsite on the lake, and the lake is small. It's a tiny little lake, and so we got to the top of that hill, and a family of 4 with 2 teenagers came running up the hill. there's a grizzly down there, there's a grizzly down there, and it growled at us. And I said, growled at you? Man, it must have had cubs then, because they usually do that, they growl when they're being defensive about things. And, no, it was all by itself, but it growled at us. We're going to leave, boom, gone. And so I looked at my group and I said, okay guys, we know that we want to go down to the lake and we want to have lunch. And we know the campsite's down there, but we also know there's a grizzly bear down there. Now, what's the wise thing to do? Should we just turn around and go the other direction? Or can we be polite and see if the bear will be polite? And so I said, I will take you down there under 2 conditions. One is that we have to walk half of the speed that we've been walking, or slower. The second condition is that you all 10 of you, have to talk at the same time. So that bear knows how many people are coming. Because that's the critical thing. The bear knows that there's 10 people through their good ears, and they're not going to mess with that. They never do. And so I said, hey, we can go down there if that's what you do. They say, yeah, okay, we'll do it. And some of them were sort of iffy about that. So I said, I don't care what you say. You can have a conversation with each other, or if you get really desperate, you can recite the Gettysburg Address, because most people know how to recite the Gettysburg Address, right? And so we started walking down there, everybody talking, walking slow. We got down to the campsite. Berries all over, thimbleberries and huckleberries all over in the campsite. I'm going, no wonder the bear was down here. And no bear. So we walked down and we sat on the logs and started having our lunch. About halfway through our lunch, all of a sudden, Mom Bear comes down 150 feet down the lake on the left side, down to the water, stops and looks at us, and then comes down closer and stops and looks at us and stops going closer and looks to make sure we're still there, and goes swimming. And see, it was a hot day, and she was swimming around, and then after she had swam a couple of little laps, and she had checked on us a lot every time, she'd swim around a circle, then she'd look as she's swimming, checking around just to make sure that we stay in the same place, being polite. And then the cubs came down on, 2 cubs came down on a log that was angled into the water, and they didn't want to go in. And she kept swimming next to him, come on, this is the way you cool off, this is the way you cool off. And they wouldn't do it, so she walked up on shore, walked down the log and slapped him into the water. And they all swam for a little while and cooled off, and then they went back in the bushes and took a nap. And my people were going, never seen anything at all like that. And it was an example of the inside life of a grizzly bear that isn't being threatened. This is what they're like all the time. But she wasn't patient because of all those berries. And so a little while later, we were almost done with lunch. I said, let's pack up and get out of here, because I'm sure she wants to get back to these berries. And so we were packing up, and as we were packing up, she comes out of the bushes and starts walking toward us. Just walking, slowly. She'd stop, then she'd walk a little farther, the cub's right behind her, then she'd stop and look. And I said, just listen. She's reciting the Gettysburg Address. and sure enough, she did that, and we said, we need to leave right now. So we went up on the top of the hill, watched them come back into the campsite and feed for a while, and walked home. And they, people who had never even heard of seeing a grizzly bear in a situation like this we had a really good education about what a real bear is really like in that kind of a situation. So anyway, charismatic megafauna. It's pretty hard to miss mountain goats when you're when you're going through the park. You have to be driving well over the speed limit to miss mountain goats when you're in Glacier National Park and going to the Sun Road, right? So these guys, you probably all know that they have special hooves for walking on the rocks, and they can pull themselves up cliffs, and they like to live in the steep stuff. But the males are interesting because in the fall, what they will do is they start to get a little bit rammy with each other, and they will find another male, and they will go up to that other male, and they will be like this, and they walk up to the other male, and the other male will be coming the other way, and they stop head to tail. And then they start hooking each other with those super sharp horns in the rear end, trying to move the other one over. You would think there would be blood all over the place, Well, their hide is about 5/8 of an inch thick right here, and they're made for it. And so it's sort of like across the line of scrimmage who can move the other guy, right? And then they just establish a dominance order. And then when they're interested in the females, the males will actually sit down and splay their legs and find a place where there's some loose dirt. Sit down, splay their legs, and they don't curl their legs like a dog, they splay them straight out like this, and then they start pawing dirt up on their belly. And in order to get the dirt to stick to their belly, they pee into the dirt as it's coming that direction. You really needed to know this, didn't you? and so it's just all a gooey, smelly mess. And that is actually what attracts the females for mating purposes. And I got to tell you, the only other time I've ever seen this kind of behavior was in a bar in northern Wisconsin. And the rest of the story is a little too graphic to tell you, but that's kind of what goats do. Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep, and it's pretty hard to not see sheep at Logan Pass either, if you've been there. And Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep have those big curled horns for a reason. And that reason happens in late October, early November. And they will be smacking heads together at 35 miles an hour. And when they do that, you would think that the IQ would drop considerably after a while. And maybe it does, I don't know, there's no way to measure it. But I do also know that those guys, when they hit each other, it's 35 miles an hour, and then they go at it again, and again, and again. And neurologists are paying attention, because of all the junior high kids that are getting concussions these days, they wonder how these guys don't get concussions. Turns out, physiological and anatomical studies, they have a lot of blood that's stored in those big horns. And that blood gets rerouted in the high testosterone level of the mating season to their brain just before, outside the brain, in the meninges of the brain, between the skull and the brain. And that's what pads their impact. If we had a way, because when kids get concussions, or even professional football players get concussions, what happens is they're going 15 miles an hour, suddenly they stop, and their brain keeps going, and it hits the inside of the skull. And so these guys protect themselves by having the protection inside the skull. You could have a helmet, a football helmet this big around, and that would not matter. You see what I'm saying? So they've been studying ways of possibly duplicating that. I don't know of many parents who would consider having their kid having an intracranial injection prior to the football game, but they're studying it to try to find out whether or not and how it works. I'm a Taurus. What's your sign?
Wait, that's funny.
The moose. Now, moose are actually, in my experience, I've been charged 3 times by moose, and so no encounters like that with bears, but moose, yeah, they're ornery sometimes. And what happens with moose in the mating season is that the male gets this weird feeling. The neck starts to swell up a little, and they start drooling. Some of you even drank that drool called moose drool beer, right? And they start drooling, and it goes down on that bell, down below their chin, and it collects there. And it drools and collects, and drools and dries and collects, and pretty soon it gets a little tiny bit ripe. And then, because they sort of really don't know what's going on, they're kind of clueless, so they want to find a mud hole, and they get in the mud hole, and they roll on their back and get mud all over themselves. And when they're on their back, they pee all over themselves to make themselves smell really good. This is becoming a theme, isn't it? And so what they do, they're getting really smelly, and they still don't have a clue. But the girls do have a clue. When they start to smell that stuff, it's Sadie Hawkins Day. And so what happens is they come up to the male and they say, "Hey, baby, I'm a Capricorn, and the males are going like, huh? You know, I mean, some things are across a lot of species, aren't they? So they say, huh? You know, and finally he gets a clue when she chases him around for sometimes a couple of days. She'll be asking him for a dance. When they finally get to that point where he says, oh yeah, I remember what this is about, he takes that bell and rubs it over her back to get all that nice smelling stuff all over her back. And that sort of claims her as the marriage of convenience for that little while. So that's how they do it all. But it all has to do with the girls being the aggressors. Wolf is a top-down management. Now, in Glacier Park, we've always had wolves. In Yellowstone, they didn't. And as you know, most of you have read the stories about what happened when they were reintroduced. There's a little bit of controversy about how much has happened and what, you know, all that sort of thing. But basically, what happens when the wolf got what happened. When I walked through through Yellowstone before I moved west, probably 40 years ago, and I was and I was walking along a creek in Yellowstone by myself, which was kind of stupid in the early spring, and I saw dead elk in various states of decay all over the place. I must have seen 30 or 35 elk in that little walk. They were just starving to death. And I was going like, man, this is just weird. Well, then the reintroductions came, and of course that was highly politically controversial. And then all of a sudden, what happens when the wolf comes back as the top of the line predator, they moved the coyotes out. The coyotes had been there cleaning up on the small mammals. Well, the small mammals came back because the coyotes had to leave because the wolves were there. The wolves ate a lot of the elk and dropped the herd down, and they were healthier because they had more to eat. The small mammals didn't eat all of the vegetation, so the elk had more to eat. And then the trees started growing back because there weren't as many elk biting down to the nub, mostly aspens and willows along the side of the creeks. So the beavers come back because they have something to eat, and they make ponds. And then you get all 50 species of pond animals that come in. This is a whole process that happened because the ecosystem was finally complete. And it all happened, and it all made it healthy, and it all made it balanced. No, there is not as many elk because there shouldn't be as many elk. I mean, it's just the way it was. So the wolves are top-down ecosystem management, and it's really important to understand that nature is complex, and the complexity is astronomical. I'll get to that later. And everything in nature is connected somehow, remotely or closely, to everything else. Everything is, including us. So, cougars. Two things about cougars. I did a book on cougars a few years back called Solitary Spirits, and I talked to quite a few cougar experts because I didn't know much about them. And two things that I thought were really kind of interesting. They hunt not by jumping down from a tree like a leopard would, right? They hunt by sneaking in within 50 feet. When they get 50 feet away, they feel like they can make a rush on almost always a deer, okay? And they make the rush, and then they catch the deer, they get to it, clamp down on both sides. I've seen deer with big claw marks on both sides of their body that had a close escape, and like this, and then they bite down on the back of the neck of the deer. They have teeth which are 1 7/8 inches apart, the canine teeth. Young ones, old ones, they all have that same distance. Guess what the distance of a neck vertebrae on a mule deer and a whitetail is? 1 7/8 inches, exactly. And so it is an instant kill. And these guys are tuned. Nature has tuned them to the deer and tuned the deer to them with their escape and stuff. The other thing that they do, which is kind of interesting, is they don't just like cats will burp up hairballs, right? If you've got a cat. And they don't like hair. And so they shave, they take their incisors and they shave the side of the deer first, and then they dive in, rip open the hide, and this is kind of gory sounding, but they rip open and they eat from the inside out toward the outside, toward the hide. And so they are a mess down to about here most of the time they're eating, because they're eating from the inside outward, because they don't like to mess with the hair. So another little kitty is the Canada lynx. Canada lynx populations really vary. They're just very low right now in our country, and they actually are considering putting them on at least a threatened list around here. And they, but they do go way up and way down and way up and way down. And the reason they go way up and way down, probably somewhere around an 11 to 14 year cycle, is that what they eat is this guy, the snowshoe hare. And the snowshoe hares are the ones who are responsible for the cycle, because if there's no food to eat, you're going to starve and your population's going down. Am I right? Okay? So, snowshoe hares breed, believe it or not, like rabbits. And when they breed like rabbits, they can have lots and lots and lots of kits. And what happens, all the bunnies in the world, sometimes in 1 acre, you can get, in some ideal habitat situations, you can get 8,000 or 9,000 snowshoe hares in an acre. I mean, they're just crazy in terms of the reproductive rate. Well, nature isn't going to stand for that. That's just the way it is. And we don't give plants enough credit, because they can only eat stuff about this high, so as high as they can stand on their hind legs and eat, right? All those shrubs in the wintertime that they eat that are woody shrubs, if they keep eating down to the nub and eating down to the nub and eating down to the nub with that high population, finally the plants say, enough, I've had it. So they start secreting terpenes and other kinds of toxic materials that make the hares sick. And the hares that get sick can't run away very well, and the lynx know it. And so when that population gets really high, the plants are the ones who determine the population of the hares, and the hare population determines the number of lynx. That's the way it works. In nature, predators do not control prey species. It is the other way around. So we should remember that when we're talking about controversial predators. Well, so what happens is in the cycle is that these guys, the hares population will drop because they get sick, and the lynx are having a field day. I mean, they're catching hares like crazy. So they have more babies that winter. The hare population's going like this, and because it's going like that, the lynx population's going like that. Does that make sense? So when they get more babies, the next year, there's not much for anybody to eat. And that's when the lynx population starts to drop. But there's always a 1 year lag between the hare population and then the lynx population, because once again, prey determine the numbers of predators. Well, little lesson there. Oh, we know about this. Fire, bad. Bad. Anyway, most of you probably didn't even see the old Frankenstein movies. So a lot of people say, "Oh no, there's a forest fire. There's so much destruction." Well, yeah, destruction or renewal. Glacier Park and fire get along really, really well. Here's a map of the fires of recent. These are the old fires, and the darkest ones are the newest fires. In 2003, we had the Trapper Creek fire, we had the Robert fire, we had a bunch of fires in 2003. 15% of the park burned. And that mosaic that gets created of different ages of the trees, especially, really creates a lot of diverse vegetation, which does create a lot of diverse animal populations, and that's just normal. And so we shouldn't be like going wailing and saying, oh, fire's so bad in the park. It's not for Glacier. Glaciers live with fire forever. This fire right here, this is the biggest one we've ever had, goes right to Apgar right there. That one was in 1929 was the Half Moon Lake fire, Half Moon Fire. And the Half Moon Fire burned 120-some thousand acres, something like that. It was a big one, the biggest one we've had in historical times. And when that happened, it wiped out the vegetation, but there's a plant called lodgepole pine, which most of you know about, which has a cone that's a serotinous cone, big fancy word that means it opens up when it gets too hot. And that means it plants itself at about 120 degrees when it opens up. So we don't get 120 degrees around here, not quite yet. And so what happens then is that the old pines get burned down and the new ones start up, and you get these stands of lodgepoles that are different ages, but when you look at the trees and count the whorls on the trees, they're all just about the same age within a year or two. And so fire's a good thing, in my opinion. It's normal. And of course, the things that happen after a fireweed, and you get about maybe 20 different species of plants that are fire dependent that come up almost immediately after a fire. And then one thing that people don't know, this is maybe something you don't know, boreal frogs reproduce like crazy right after a fire. You wouldn't think, boreal toads reproduce like crazy. And you can hardly walk down a trail sometimes after a fire and not step on a baby boreal toad. I mean, seriously, that's how thick they are at times. Millions of them come out. And that's because the opening of the canopy opens up and warms up all of those temporary ponds where all the eggs have been stored for who knows how long, and that's when they come out. So they're dependent on fire for their population. Blackback woodpeckers. This guy is sort of a fir tree specialist removing bark after a fire. And it's got a relative, the northern three-toed woodpecker, or actually, is it the American three-toed woodpecker? It's American, isn't it? No, it's Mexican now.
Oh, that was good. That was good.
So the American three-toed woodpecker is more of a fir, more of a spruce specialist in terms of removing bark. The difference here is that these guys are in a little bit more diverse, or the blackbacks are a little more diverse. They like lodgepole pines and firs, and these guys like firs and spruce. So the spruce specialist. These guys can hang around in high population levels for maybe 15 years after a fire, but the bark on most of those trees that burn falls off by itself. And so there's no bark to remove for the beetles that are under the bark for the black-backed woodpecker after about somewhere around 7 to 10 years. And so they have to move on to the next fresh fire. So there's a little bit of difference there between the two. And of course we have avalanches. It's avalanche country there, and this is Avalanche Lake. One of the avalanche specialists is this little plant right here. It's a shrub. It's called the black twinberry. It's also called, some people call it bearberry, but the berries are in twos. Do you see how this? Yeah, there are two there, two there, two there, two there, two there. They're twins. That plant, the leaves of that plant, are actually the only food of the only endangered species that we have in Glacier National Park. The only one. And that only, we don't have any other endangered species in the park except for the Gillette checker spot butterfly. And the larvae eat exclusively twinberry. It's in the honeysuckle family, and they eat exclusively those leaves. And so it makes sense, doesn't it? How many places in this world are avalanche chutes, compared to other kinds of habitats? It makes sense that this guy probably has always been kind of rare just because of where it has to find most of its food. Trail of the Cedars, big, big trees. And it's not just a forest, it's also an ecosystem that has been there for a very, very long time. And what happens then is that do all of you know how trees communicate with each other? Have you read some books about that lately? They actually can talk to each other, but they talk through a system of fungus, mycelia, which are the tiny microscopic rootlets of fungi that wrap around the rootlets of all coniferous trees in order to get those, and they actually do the work getting minerals into the rootlets of coniferous trees. So there is a complete dependent symbiotic relationship there. Does that make sense? Between fungus. Some of that fungus is like one single organism, and it will cover acres and will weigh tons if you could gather it all and make it in one spot. And trees can actually tell when other trees next by are under stress from some other reason, and all sorts of other things. Well, anyway, no fungus, no forest, right? With me so far? Well, then you get a lot of other things happening in this forest. Trees fall down. And when trees fall down, they start to decay. Now, they start to decay sometimes if they're suspended. They start to decay, I'll use this thing, it's a lot easier. They start to decay mostly at the top because of all the rain that we get at the easternmost extent of the temperate rainforest called Avalanche Creek. So that place becomes soil real early, and then the new hemlocks start popping up, growing, the seeds fall and start growing on the top of a nurse log. That log, as it falls down, from the time it falls down till the time that it is just dirt and you can't tell it's a log anymore, most people estimate that study this sort of stuff, that in that log there will be, over that time, 20,000 species of organisms. Species. That's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of stuff. It's a very, very complex system. And everybody in that system fits into it somehow. Like the redback vole, which is indicative of that area. It's the little mousy thing that lives there. Redback voles eat mushrooms and fungus. And they get the spores on their back and they tunnel. So they plant new fungus everywhere and they help the trees to grow. So you see everybody in this system, that you can't find somebody in that system that isn't connected in a very critical kind of a way. That's just the way nature has worked. And the depth of this is astounding. We've had life here on this planet for 3.7 billion years. That's a lot of time. Different kinds of life, a lot of time. But in that time, we have now developed 400,000 species of plants on planet Earth. That's a lot. That's not individuals, that's different species. And we've also developed 6 million species of insects. And some of them are friendly and some of them are not. And we also have 160,000 species of spiders. And of course, spiders eat insects and other insects eat insects. And you can see they all eat plants and blah, blah, blah. So all these different species are there somehow and they've got a purpose of some sort. There are 1 trillion species of microbes in the world. Species, different kinds of microbes, bacteria, viruses, fungi, things like that. And 11 to 18,000, somewhere in that range, species of birds, which you might be interested in if you're here tonight. And the difference between 11,000 and 18,000 is that 11,000 came from morphological differences, and now they're getting into genetics, and they're moving pretty quickly toward that number. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of species there. Well, Homo sapiens have been around here for 300,000 years from archaeological records. Before that, it was other species of humans, but it wasn't us. So for 300,000 years, we've been here. Birds have been here for 150 million years. We have been 500 times as long as we have been here. 500 times as long as we have been here. So, by evolutionary standards, we're an experiment. A very short-term experiment. How's that going for you? So anyway, so complexity in nature is just, and that's why having an intact system like Glacier National Park is so important, because we can study this and we can find out eventually a whole lot of things about what's going on. Some of the other cool things, the rubber boa, which is a little tiny snake that lives in the low wet areas on the west side. This rubber boa is easy prey. Weasel comes along and says, "No, you can't even, you can't get away from me." And the rubber boa sees the weasel and decides, "I've got a method." And the rubber boa will turn itself into a rattlesnake, coil up and start hissing and start striking at whatever predator it is with its tail, which means they think that predator thinks it's the head. So the predator will grab the tail disengages, keeps wiggling to keep the predator busy as the snake is slowly going away. And so this one has already lost its tail. You can see right there that it's got a scar on that. So some predator probably grabbed it by the tail. So it's a fake rattlesnake, tiny little rattlesnake, but it's got a method. When you're slow and you're tasty, you got to come up with something, right? Pacific wrens live in that deep, dark forest. They like the undergrowth in that, unless the tree falls over in the branches, and they love that kind of a situation. These guys have a high-pitched trill that goes on and on and on and on, like for 2 minutes. And the reason they can do that is not because they have lungs the size of this room. They actually can inhale on one side with one lung and sing on the inhale and the exhale and keep cycling, so they can do cyclic breathing and be able to sing for a long time. Most complex song in all of nature as far as we know so far. This little guy, 2 inches long, has the most complex song, 36 notes per second when we slow it down. And nobody else has a song that complicated in the world, as far as we know yet. And then, of course, at the tops of the trees, we have that guy. I'm going to have to probably drink some of my water here just because I've got some whistling to do. You know, most...
I can't do it.
What? You can't do it?
I would not be able to do it.
Okay. Well, right? All you have to do, and then and then they keep changing pitch. Well, guess where they got their name? Because the pitch keeps changing. So that's where they're very thrushes, and they live in the tops of those big old hemlock trees and cedar trees. And speaking of music, when you're walking through the woods there, the thing you're going to hear probably most often is the Swainson's thrush. That one is a sort of a spiral trill upward. And it's got that one's here, probably the most common bird song in the whole woods in Glacier, as far as I know. And then there's the hermit thrush. It'll have little higher elevations usually, and that one has a single note at the beginning. And they change pitch too. Rusty tail, buffy body, and they're high elevation birds. And then in the aspen parklands on the eastern side of the park, where there's a little bit less, a lot more wind, a little less rain, and you get aspens in the lowlands, and you get pines on the tops of the ridges, sometimes limber pines, which are kind of a rare species. And in the aspens on that side will live the veeries. And they have a downward spiral. Like that. And also occasionally maybe not this far east, but I had to throw it in there because it's my favorite bird song. Is the wood thrushes will maybe come to the eastern part of Glacier Park. They're in the eastern part of Montana for sure. And they have a three-parted thing. And then flute-like, and then, right? So those are the music. This guy comes through on the east side too, but only comes through in the springtime mostly. And you can see the blackpoll warbler over there in the spring, probably right about now. They're cruising through, and the blackpoll warbler is. I like to throw this in because they do something ultra spectacular. Blackpoll warblers go to the small trees up in Alaska in Northwest Territories, places where the trees have shrunk and you're almost to the tundra, right? And they nest there. And from the western Alaska part of that, they're way over there by Nome and places like that, with and they're nesting there. They grow. They have their babies. They eat like crazy. They hyperphagia again for about a week in the fall, and they go on their migration route, which is two-parted from there. The first part of their migration route goes from Alaska, western Alaska, to Newfoundland, non-stop. This is a half-ounce bird that weighs an ounce when it starts and loses half of its weight. And then from there, they gas up again, eating a lot of insects, and they put on fat in the eastern part of Canada, and they head out over the Atlantic, and they go way out over Bermuda and whatever else is out there, probably not much but sea, and they catch the westerlies, and they will end up wintering in Guyana and Venezuela and on the northern part of South America. First flight is about 2,300 miles. The second flight is about 2,200 miles. Half ounces and a half ounce of fat for that amount of time. That's what they use. I did the math. And they get, on that route from Canada to Guyana, they get 500,000 miles per gallon of fat. That is efficient. Priuses eat your heart out. They are absolutely amazing. And then we have the mysterious bird. Very uncommon. Some people think there are 15,000 in the whole world, but probably always uncommon because of two things. One is slow reproductive rate. They have one chick a year. So they have to have at least two successful raising of chicks in order to replace themselves. Okay? That's one thing. The second thing is where they nest, right here on this moss nest, is a very specific spot. They nest most of the time behind waterfalls. And guess where a lot of waterfalls, because of vertical cliffs, are in this part of the world? Glacier. Yeah. In fact, they've been, I don't know, has anybody here been on any of the surveys? Have you been on, Jake, have you been on any of the surveys for these guys?
I'm not at the official surveys. I've been at lakes where I was asked to, and I saw some of them.
I don't know what the count is right now. At first we found 6 places. And then the next year there were like 15, and they keep doing it. So they're in the 30s right now of places in Glacier National Park. Turns out that density so far, and we know there are a lot of other places where it could be better, but the density right now as far as actually knowing is Glacier National Park. We are the #1 in terms of having the most dense populations of black swifts. Mom and Dad come in at dusk, before it's dark, but after sunset, feed that chick one time, and then they're off flying. Swifts fly, and swifts fly. That's what they do. They eat in the air. They drink in the air. They court in the air. They mate in the air. Some people think they sleep in the air. But how do you do that without a co-pilot? It's pretty tough. 2 ways. One is they go really high at night sometimes, maybe 10,000 feet high, and lock their wings and just hit right the updrafts. they do this vesper flight that they call it. It's some kinds of swifts, and some people think it's sort of nature's way of them being able to spy coming weather from the west or from wherever they're westerly or wherever it comes from. But they do that every night. And the other thing is that some people think that they do what frigate birds and albatrosses do, and that is to sleep with one half of their brain. One hemisphere sleeps as the other one is operating and catching insects. And then they switch it off. And they go back and forth so they can sleep and do their thing at the same time. So they use half of their brain at a time. I know lots of situations where people use half of their brain at a time. I've seen that in bars. I've seen it at the voting booth. Anyway, not that I have any opinions about that. So common loons are also in Jake, I think you went and saw the ones that on that small lake between Quartz and Upper Quartz, right? Yeah. We count this every year. In Glacier National Park, there's a citizen science program. And some of the critical species that we really want to know a lot about, we have people going out spotting them and taking notes and doing all sorts of citizen science research. Common loons are pretty common in the park because there's a lot of lakes and a lot of decent fish. They're what I studied when I was doing my master's work back in Minnesota, don't you know, in Wisconsin. And I decided that, can I give you a loon language lesson? Is that possible? Sure. So they say 4 basic things. One is a local call, mom to dad, during the nesting season, and it's very complicated. It goes like this. It's called the hoot, and it means, I'm okay, you okay, sort of thing. It's a contact call. But when they dial 1 in the area code and want to talk to people across the lake or over the ridge, the other loons that aren't there necessarily their mates, they will do the wail. Like that. Very mournful kind of a sign. If you ever hear one do that, that means is there anybody out there? Do you want to start a concert? Okay, because they start talking to each other. And then the other thing that they do is they do a wail that doesn't have the in the middle. It goes slowly up and down. Sounds more mournful. And if you ever hear that one, look up, because there will be a bald eagle there every single time. That is their call. That is their call for eagles, and you will only hear that call when there's an eagle. And they have better eyes than we do, so I use them when I want to spot eagles. And then, oops, I'm going to have to back up once more. The third one is the one you hear most often, and the reason you hear it most often is because you were there, usually, and it's called a tremolo. And that means danger, danger. Two-legged bare-faced thing coming in long aluminum tub. Okay? And if it's real danger, like another male comes in trying to kill chicks, and that happens from another territory, they will do stage 2 tremolo, when they jump up an octave, jumping up, and stage 3 tremolo is like, that you hear that, and they're usually doing a vulture dance or a penguin dance, which is their version of the broken wing act to get whatever danger there is away. The males then do the yodel. And that means you should always count the number of dipsy-doos. How many? 5. Yeah. If you ever get up to 9, you know you're talking about one macho loon. That is a serious loon indeed. 10 would be Arnold Schwarzenegger loon, I think. And that's by the way, that is one of those songs that if you put it on a sonogram, you can tell the difference between Mortimer and Fred and Ralph and George. Because if you got a good musical ear, you can hear it too, because Mortimer might be going, but Fred will be going. You see what I'm saying? Lots of differences like that if you've got a good ear. So that's what loon language is. And this is, chicks ride the back, and people love to see that, right? Well, there's a couple good reasons for that. One is when it gets big and wavy. These chicks are born 7 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than mom and dad when they're born. And they're in the water after 2 hours after hatching. They're very precocial. And so that means that they're conducting their heat to the water instead of convecting their heat to the air, which is 25 times as slow. You see what I'm getting at? So they have to raise that body temperature. So they sit on mom and dad's back a lot because they can be in the air instead of in the water. And that helps them, in the first 2 weeks especially, be able to do thermal regulation. But everybody really knows, we humans really know, the reason they do this is because it's cute. That's the reason they do it. Bogs and fens in the park. Not many. Johns Lake is a bog. There are fens, much larger fens, McGee Meadows, you know what I'm talking about. Fens would be sedges, bogs would be sphagnum moss, which is this stuff right here along the edge. And Johns Lake is one. Another one that I think is a bog, and is the Numa Ridge. When you look down from Numa, you look down and you see this little pothole there that's isolated. And that makes me suspect that it's a bog, because those bogs are isolated spots. No creek going in, no creek going out. They don't get fed mineral nutrients. And that means that the plant assemblages in those bogs is very different, because it's sterile there, very sterile. So the plants have methods of dealing with that. What they do is they will, 3 things. One is that they will grow very slowly, like the black spruce trees or some of the trees that grow on the edges of bogs can be this big around and be a couple hundred years old, very slowly. Second way of dealing with it is to secrete acid into the water as you grow. A lot of these plants are acidic. The bog water itself is somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 pH. It's really, it's like vinegar almost. And then the third way that they deal with it is to get their mineral nutrients that they don't have from some outside source. And so what happens, like this is the sphagnum moss, which is the base of most bogs. And if you grab this stuff and squeeze it, it's like a sponge. It'll contain a lot of water, but that water is high acid. And that high acid makes this stuff very sterile. Finns used it for chinking in the logs, and there are some Finns and Norwegians and Swedes use this for chinking on log houses. Some of that chinking is still there after 400 years. It's totally preserved. And also, because it is so sterile and absorbent, Florence Nightingale, when she ran out of bandages, would go out to the bog and grab bog stuff for using wound compresses in the war. And also, the natives didn't notice too, around here too, and they use this stuff for rash-free baby diapers because it's very absorbent and it's antiseptic. So it's pretty cool stuff. This little plant, bladderwort, grows in the water nearby in a bog, and it floats. And if you look at the bottom part, this is what the flower looks like. The bottom part is a bunch of little bladders. And these bladders have hairs on them. You see these hairs right there, and right there, and right there? Those little hairs, if an insect comes along and touches that hair, aquatic insect, that little bladder inflates suddenly, sucks the insect in, lunchtime. And so these plants are getting their nutrients by being carnivorous. Oh, so the plants are finally learning to get back at us. Here is another one, the sundew. Sundew is a plant that has, it's about this big around, the whole plant. And it grows on top of the sphagnum. And it has little spokes that go out with little pods and hairs on the pods and drops of sparkly dew on the ends of the hairs, as you can see. And that sparkly dew is very attractive to bugs who come and say, I'm going to go get a drink. And maybe there's even some sugar in that water. And when they land, they realize that it's not dew, it's glue. And so what happens is they will eventually absorb the nutrients from the bug. So keep that in mind. Evolution is still happening. These guys have started the process of eating us. And someday, there will be hell to pay for human beings. Here's a fen. This is McGee Meadows, and the things that live in that fen are pretty cool. One of the ones that is very cool is that we occasionally, some of the people in here probably have gone out with hip boots and done a LeConte sparrow hike. And it's a tiny little sparrow with a very silent call, and that's one of the only places we can find it around here. Not even every year does it nest in the fen, but it does nest out there. And some of the other things that live there would be snipe. For all of you who went to summer camp with the gunny sack, this is the guy right here, okay? And that's, you can't call them in with a flashlight. Sorry, it's not gonna work. But the snipe does this beautiful song. It's kind of, you've heard this, I'm sure you've heard it in springtime, probably right now. And soon anyway, it goes like this. Have you heard that? Yeah, every place where it's wet, like even a flooded agricultural field, you will hear that in the springtime. And that is the snipe male doing its mating song. But it's kind of an interesting song because it's really hard to tell where it comes from. It's ventriloquistic. So what they do is actually, the reason it's ventriloquistic is that they're so high in the air, you almost need binoculars to find them. And so what they do is they go into a dive. They fly up in the air and twitter a little bit, and then they go into a dive, straight as an arrow, and it looks like they died of a heart attack and they're going smack into the ground, right? When they reach a certain speed, they fan their tail with the head down, and the outside two feathers on that tail vibrate, making the sound. So they make that sound with their tail, not with their voice box, which is kind of cool. Yeah. So, and it's called winnowing. Can you say that? Winnowing? Winnowing, yeah. Winnowing. So next time you eat beans and make a sound with your tail, it's called winnowing, yes, yeah. And then the spruce, we have grouse, the Franklin spruce grouse, and these guys like 30-foot tall lodge poles in the springtime. The male will fall down and they can do this display that they do. They're very pretty when they're displaying. And they will fly out of and really loud flyers. Grouse are loud flyers, you know, all the time when they fly. Well, they fly down, and just before they hit the ground, they take their wings and smack them way up above their back together. So it's like, whack, and that's what you'll hear when this, and that's attractive to the girls. This is a guy right here who's trying to explain how they do that. Dusky grouse. A dusky grouse is a ridge runner. We see these things everywhere and every day up at the Jewel Basin Hawk Lodge. And they're there all the time because it's right at the top of a knife ridge. And so they like to be on top of the ridge where the wind takes the snow away in the wintertime. That's where they feed. So this is a male, and then the male, when he's displaying, looks like this, dressed up and ready to party. And so that's what they look like when they do their kind of strange woof, 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 woof kind of sounds. And ruffed grouse in the lowlands, in the aspens primarily. Quick story. I shouldn't tell you this story because I did the wrong thing once. That's the only time I've done the wrong thing, okay? But I did the wrong thing once. Don't talk to Mary Jo, please. And I did the wrong thing because this is back a long time ago. I did not know that you should not be doing bird calls to try to call birds in so you can see them. Ethically, it's naughty. Okay, you gotta have to understand that. That's odd because what you're doing often is you're making the birds use more energy that they really don't have to spare when they're raising chicks. And so because they have to be feeding, chickadees will need 3,000 to 6,000 caterpillars to raise a brood. and that's only 2 people. So you think we're busy as parents. I mean, so they take a lot of, so we don't, us ethical birders don't do this anymore. But back when I didn't know any better, I was out with some 5th graders in the woods. And we were walking along on a trail, and I heard a grouse drumming. You know, what this guy's, he's on a log, right? And he's drumming, he's compressing the air against his chest with his wings. And it sounds woof, 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 faster and faster and faster. So he's doing that, and I heard it back in the thick stuff, and of course you can't see the bird because they like it really thick. So I said, you know, I said to the kids, I said, I've tried to get pictures of this thing by sneaking up on them. They're very wary, can't sneak up, can't hide in the blind because they get too spooked by the blind and they won't show up. So time to get radical. So I stopped and I said, just everybody be quiet, listen. He drummed back to me. Walked toward him. I drummed. He drummed. Walked toward him. I drummed. He drummed. Walked toward him again. I drummed. He drummed. Soon I was 10 feet away, snapping pictures like this one. That's the guy. 5th graders behind me going, wondering why they came in the woods with this guy. We drummed back and forth this grouse that you see right here and myself for 1 full hour. He was hissing, fanning his tail, pecking at the log. And I gotta tell you, in that hour, between the 2 of us, we called in 8 females. And I don't know if it was him or me. The story of my life is I didn't know what to do after they got there. So back in the day, at least, you could have a little fun with grouse. Actually, when I think about it, I actually probably helped his love life out a lot. Because when I left, he was going to get busy. There's no question about it. So anyway, gray jays are my favorite bird. They pick insects and seeds, and they will paste with their gular pouch, their saliva, paste 25,000 different pieces of food on the outside of tree trunks in their home range. So anyway, gray jays cache food, and they remember all of those 25,000 places that they put food. Yeah. And the other thing that they do is pretty cool, in my opinion, and some people actually think, there's conjecture, no studies so far, but there's conjecture that they can actually predict the coming snow level and put all of their food above the high point of the coming snow. So Farmer's Almanac, eat your heart out, right? So we don't know that for sure. And the gray jays will, in the springtime when they have their babies, it's early spring, they've had their chicks already. Their chicks are half grown at least, they're very early nesters. And the chicks, if they have 3, let's say, one of those chicks is going to be a little bit more aggressive. I call it a little bit more, or maybe a lot more whiny than the other ones, right? And so they, go to mom and dad. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I don't want to fledge and get out of here because, you know how that works. And then you never do that, right? So I don't want to go to college. I want to stay here like Uncle Fred, who's been here since 43 years. And anyway, on and on. So what happens is that mom and dad finally give up and they say, oh, all right, you can stay, but I'm kicking your brother and your sister out. So they do that. That one gets to stay with them all the way through the summer, the fall, the winter, and learn the ropes on how to do the caching and all the stuff that they have to do, which is pretty cool for that one. The trade-off is, in the springtime, that one has to stay around through the season where they're raising chicks, and there are 3 adult birds feeding the chicks instead of just 2. So mom and dad have a plan, that comes to fruition later on. The other thing is that you wonder about those poor little ones that got booted out, right? Oh, babies booted out. Well, they go on a pilgrimage until they find an unsuccessful nesting pair, and they whine at them until they get adopted. And so you might have 3 flying in the spring. When you're out there in the summer, literally, if you see a gray jay, stop. And I almost guarantee you that another one will come in, and then a third one will come in. That they travel around in 3s. 3 is not a crowd in the gray jays. I think that is absolutely, that tells me that these guys are super smart. I mean, they have adapted a way for the unsuccessful nesters to pass along the genes of the successful nesters. So they're going to catch us and pass us by on IQ in a few thousand years, I predict, because they've got that advantage over us. There are lots of places where there's a lot of cold water at high places. This is a falls down at Logan Pass that people don't usually get to because they're not supposed to walk there. But in these cold creeks lives this guy. Who is it? Mexican dipper?
Oh.
American dipper. And the American dipper has these massive toes for gripping slippery rocks, eats a lot of insects, aquatic insects, diving down, waterproof feathers, oily, smelly feathers. They walk around the bottom and gather bugs and bring them back to the kids, and they have these nests in the cliff. And the other thing that I think is really cool about them is, they winter over here. They don't migrate. So they have to do this under the ice in lots of situations, in water that is very cold. So they have to have a lot of food, as you might well imagine. And they when they do that, when they're under the ice, they will gather these things. But what I wanted to show you, I'm going to back up here. One more thing about them, besides having a high metabolic rate, is that they have these eyes that are really strange. When you see them close up with the binoculars, all of a sudden there's going to be a flash where the eye turns silver. You're like, what's that? Silver, and then back. It's silver, and then back, silver, and then back. They've got a third eyelid, top, bottom, and the third one from here that goes over the eye, and that one stays closed under the water. And the reason it's silver looking, it's goggles of course, is that it has microscopic feathers on the outside of the goggle lens. So that because they would lose a lot of heat from near their brain out of their eyes, and so that's one way they can have a lot of their thermal regulation. So that's kind of, I bet you didn't know that about them, did you? The other thing that they do is they dip. They don't dip in the water, they do that too, but they do this when they get up on the rock. You know why? We think. Huh? Peeing in their pants? Is that what you said? That's what you do probably. Yeah. So me too, actually. And so what happens is that what they're doing, actually, we think, is that they're doing trigonometry. Yeah. They see a bug down in the water, and there's refraction. You've been at the dock and you've seen the fish down below. Is it where it looks like it is? No. And they have a way of adapting to that by looking at that bug from here, and then from here, and then from here, and then here, and here, and here, and here. And the brain says 1.3 and a half meters to that bug. And so they triangulate to estimate the distance to their prey. Trigonometry. Also, back up here a bit, I advanced too fast. There's the tailed frog that lives way up high you wouldn't think that up at Logan Pass in that water that has snow and ice still in it, there would be a frog. Frogs are supposed to be warm water things. The tailed frog has a tail, the male only has this tail, and it's not really a tail. You can imagine what it is because it's a male. It's an internal fertilizing organ, right? Because the female cannot lay the eggs on a piece of vegetation like normal frogs because they would never hatch. The water's too cold. So she has to carry those eggs inside of her. And this is in Glacier Park up high. She carries the eggs, and then when they hatch, they come out of her, and that's how it works. When they come out, they become a tadpole, of course, because they're frogs, and that tadpole has a whole bunch of ridged suckers on the mouth. It's a big mouth, and it latches on to the algae, and then it swims forward and scrapes the algae off the top of the rocks as it's going forward in the fast streams, and eats the algae, and that's how it grows up. Because the water is that cold, this tadpole will take 4 years to become a frog. 4 years to become a frog. And we've done some genetic testing on these guys. Not me, but people have. And the genetics on this tailed frog are the closest relative to this frog is a frog that lives in New Zealand. About as far away from here as you can get, the closest relative. What's going on there? Well, if you know anything about geology, you know that once upon a time there wasn't a bunch of continents, there was one. And that was about when the amphibians started to come out of the water and crawl around on the land. So we think that these guys are related because they were from a common ancestor on Pangaea back in the day. So that's what we think. So anyway, water shrews are kind of cool. They live up there too and dive in the water. They have the carry of their hair. They can't stay under very long because they have so much air in their hair, pop right back up like a bobber. They can actually scoot across the water because they can capture air in their feathered, their hairy. You see all these little microscopic hairs on the toes. They can scoot across the water, and they eat a lot. They have to eat every 3 hours or more, or they die. Most of them in activity eat every 10 minutes. And that's the kind of metabolic rate that they have to live in that super cold water as a shrew. And then, of course, some in the alpine, you can see, it's a lovely place to be in the alpine for sure. But the plants that live there have a tough life. We're talking about a 2-month season here. And in that 2 months, you have to grow, produce a flower, seeds from the flower, plant them to reproduce. And most of them don't. Most of them can't do that. Not every year. They have to have a special year to be able to do it. What they do is they send out rootlets and clone themselves. And so that's how you see a whole bunch of plants in one place. And so the ways that they deal with this, there's probably 30 different ways that they deal with that short, cold season with cold nights. One of them is to start early, like the glacier lily, pop right through the snow. Another way to deal with it is to clump together like the moss campion. This is a very high elevation plant on the tops of mountains. And they conserve heat by clumping together. And this one has massive flowers to attract the only kinds of, the pollinators on top are mostly bumblebees, because they're big and they're hairy and they can handle the cold nights themselves. So these plants are there. Look at the size of the leaves. Tiny little leaves, waxy to keep the wind from desiccating and drying them out. And huge flowers on the Jones columbine. And that's to attract the pollinators. And another way of dealing with it is to be hairy yourself. I've done this throughout my lifetime. And another way that you can do it is to be exactly the right size for a bumblebee to not be able to get in there without grabbing some pollen on the way out. That's exactly the right size of the explorers. The other thing that the explorer's gentian does is at nighttime when it's colder, they close up. This one is just opening up in the morning. These catch more sunlight and they're farther open, but they close completely to hold that heat in against the seed-producing part of the flower. And then we have the bell-shaped flowers that point downward to capture geothermal heat at night, like the mountain heather. And the pygmy bitterroot is a parabolic receiver for receiving sunlight in the daytime. It's all about not drying out and warmth if you live up there as a plant. And then there's one that's a parabolic receiver that actually follows the sun. It's from one side so in the morning that glacier, and it's endemic to Glacier. Well, that one follows the sun. In the morning it's pointed east, at noon it's pointed south, in the evening it's pointed west. So they actually are is that heliotropism? I think that's the word, right? Heliotropic. Well, then you have another method. This is a tiny little plant called a butterwort. And the butterwort has leaves. It's called butterwort because the leaves look like the color of butter. Tiny little plant, beautiful little flowers. But their way of dealing with that slow growing season is to grow faster by gaining nutrients from the outside. And just like their buddies in the bog, they collect food that flies around. And so they will eat a lot of insects. So there's a lot of ways that they deal with things. White bark pines, endemic, a very important plant in Glacier. They used to be. 1910, there was a boat that came into from the Netherlands into Vancouver, and that started the white pine blister rust and almost wiped these guys out completely. They live at high elevations at tree line, and we've had some success with a nursery in Coeur d'Alene raising rust-resistant trees that are now being planted all the way through the forests in the west. And so far, keep fingers crossed, we might be able to bring them back. Not while we're still around, but eventually. They have a cone, which is sort of a purple cone, and inside that cone is a seed that looks very much like the pine nuts you buy at the store. And it's full of fat and protein. And literally, it was at tree line was the gathering place for grizzly bears, black bears, 50 kinds of birds, red squirrels, on and on, anybody who would eat those seeds. And that was the gathering place for years. When those plants went away, the bears had to move downslope into the huckleberries. Meanwhile, people keep moving in and moving their houses up into the huckleberries, and you get conflict. And so that has not been good for the bears either, as you probably know already. So the purple cones on those guys. Well, here's a bird that kind of evolved, I think, with the white bark pine. This bird is a Clark's nutcracker, gathers those seeds from the white bark pines, plants them like its relative, the gray jay, 35 different places, sunny southwestern facing slopes so that they melt off in the springtime earlier. And they bury them 3 at a time, up to 85,000 different seeds. And they remember them all. They actually did an experiment. One professor did an experiment and gave all of his graduate students 500 pine nuts to go bury to see how well they could do. 10%. These guys do about 90% retrieval, and the other 10% get planted as trees because they plant them 7/8 of an inch deep when they bury them, which is the perfect germinating depth for new white bark pines, and the perfect place to germinate for new white bark pines. So they have been living together and moving together and evolving together for eons, obviously. And then when the glaciers melt, that's going to be interesting because there are some species, and they melt. There are some species like the glacier stonefly, which we found as a new species, but endemic to the tops of glaciers, or snowfields and glaciers where it melts out, and they're gathering all that stuff that melts out of the glaciers that's settled in there. Okay, and that's where they eat. And it's a big stonefly, but it can only live like on a glacier. And if it gets too warm, it kills it. And so if the glaciers go away, the snowfields go away, or it gets too warm, no more glacier stoneflies. That's a new species. And there's the meltwater stonefly, which is an aquatic version of the stonefly that can only live within 1/4 of a mile of a melting glacier or snowfield because the water gets too warm for them when they get farther than that away. So as the glaciers go, there will be other things going with it. And that's kind of, the ones that are kind of in danger, the pika, we're watching them pretty carefully. At 6 inches of terminal cuteness. One of my, Becky, can't remember her last name. She calls them potatoes with ears. That's what they look like. And they go, eep, that kind of cute little, they're cute as heck. But they're also very vulnerable. They're an interesting critter because they live in talus, The talus is like 1 foot in diameter to 10 feet in diameter, so there's a lot of spaces between those rocks. It's not that shale, that's, you know, that scree kind of stuff. It's bigger talus. And that they can't dig because they're a rabbit. Despite their tiny round ears, they're a rabbit. So they don't dig, and they can't dig. So what they do is they go under these talus, and they will build their house, and they go out and they find lots and lots of vegetation. They're little farmers, is what they are. They're hay farmers. So they gather vegetation and they bring it back under the rocks, and then they have their latrines under the rocks as well. And they're very neat because they all poop in the same spot, as you can see. And the interesting thing about that is because they're rabbits, we can tell they're rabbits right away by looking at the poop. Because some of those things are big and they're light colored, and that's the first time through. And the other ones are the second time through. And most rabbits of any kind and hares will do that. So that's what pikas do. And obviously, one of the things about pikas I should mention is that when they are out in 75 or warmer degree weather at high elevations, they're dead for 2 hours. If they're out there for more than 2 hours, they're dead. They are very susceptible to overheating. On the other hand, as the winters get shorter and the snow levels for insulation in the winter, because they don't hibernate, is lower and lower, that means it's colder in the winter, warmer in the summer, and it gets at them from both directions. And so we're watching them very carefully with the citizen science stuff. White-tailed ptarmigans, two things I want to tell you about them. One is that they change the color, you know that, and they're also very susceptible to problems because if the spring comes later and they're still white, everybody can see them. And if the spring, you know, in the other direction, of course, if the snows come later in the fall, they've already turned white because they change their color based on the day length. And so as that happens, they're also going to be vulnerable. Well, two things I want to tell you about. One is that these guys they have spare time. They fill their crops with alpine willows, and then in the middle of the afternoon when their crops are full, they got to quit eating, right? So what they do is then they go up to the top of a hill in a group and they slide down the hill and slide down the hill to the bottom, run back up the hill, slide down, run back. They're otters. They're trying to be otters, and they're just having fun. It's like there's no other good explanation for that than that. We tend to be so egotistical, we think we're the only ones that are smart enough to be whimsical. There's a lot of animals that know how to play. They know how to play. So that's what they're doing. The other thing I want to tell you about them was a study that was done by a couple of guys from the University of Montana. And one of the studies, well, another study I should tell you about is that Dave Benson, who's a ranger in the park, has been studying the ones behind the moraine that you walk next to at Logan Pass when you go up the boardwalk. And behind that is a population of ptarmigans, well, white-tailed ptarmigans. And the ptarmigans back about 20 years ago, there were 63 or 64 of them. And lately, the number's been about 18. And so he's just been doing a study in that one spot. These two guys from Montana decided that they were going to study what happens for winter thermal regulation. These guys fly up in the air, dive down into the snow, go down to the bottom to a crust or the bottom or the ground, and then they will burrow for a little ways because they don't want a weasel or a fox or a wolverine or somebody like that to jump on that hole and be able to nail them, right? So they will burrow a little ways and then go to sleep. And then they wake up, and because they've got a full crop, they poop. So they don't want to sleep there, so they burrow a little ways and they go to sleep. And then they wake up, and they poop. And they burrow a little ways and they stop. Then they wake up and they poop. On the average, 49 times per bird per night. 49 times. We think we have problems at our age. I mean, yeah. My question about that is who did that study? And my second question is, why? But I bet you didn't know that about ptarmigans. And finally, my last critter, the wolverine, Mr. Tough Guy. This is the guy who's 40 pounds and runs grizzlies off a kill every once in a while with sheer, unadulterated attitude. That's what they do. And they're tough guys. And they're out in the wintertime. They have a 200 square mile area that they will hunt. There are probably a population in Glacier National Park that is saturated is about 32. And that's 1 million acres. So they need a lot of room. And they're up high all the time, big feet for walking on the snow, scavenging, predating. They're tough guys. They're really tough. Show you how tough. They did a study between 2000 and 2005. Some people went out in the wintertime and they got satellite tags and implanted satellite tags in the wolverines that they caught. And this is, I believe this is Cosley Lake right here, or I can't remember. But down here, this is in the what's the valley? Yeah, Belly River. And the Belly River, and what we found out with these satellite tags on these different critters is that they play with each other. They were much more, so we thought they were just ornery and they only got that to get together for mating and they're solitary and kind of grouchy, right? They play with their 2-year-old sons and daughters or 3-year-old kids, and they have extended families and they get together socially a lot more than we ever thought. The other thing they found out was following number 3, male number 3, playing with his 2-year-old son down here, wrestling around in the winter, dead of winter. And there's, in Glacier there's a lot of snow. Sometimes it gets to be, the big drift gets 50 feet, right? And so they were playing down here, and M3 decided, I'm gonna go for a walk. So it went off across the lake and went up this valley, and got all the way up to about here. Must have smelled something he liked, or maybe even found something to eat, I don't know, right in this area. Did a couple loops, and then kept going right up to this face, and this face is about 1,500 feet of nothing but sheer in the winter with maybe 15 feet of snow on it. Went straight up that face to the top of Mount Cleveland, the tallest peak we have in the park. And that was about 5,200 feet of elevation gain with a little bit of playing in the middle all the way to the top in 90 minutes. 90 minutes. And then he went back to the other side, down into the valley on the far side, took a nap, decided he missed playing with his kid, reversed course, went back to the top of Mount Cleveland, and followed his trail back to this and started. 24 hours later, he was playing with his kid again. So he climbed Mount Cleveland twice. And they're tough. They're really tough. They have endurance that you can't believe. But they're also very vulnerable because they have to be, in the warm summers, they have to be above tree line at least to stay alive. They can't stand the heat, so they have to get out of the kitchen. That's the way it works for them. Just like pikas, they're very vulnerable to heat. So even though you're tough, you can't be tough when the whole world changes around you, which is happening with climate change. You can't do that. And that's the weird part about this whole thing. It's like we as a people have to understand that preserving this intact system that has all of its components in Glacier National Park is not about the park. It's about us. It's about what we do on a daily basis to make sure that our impact for climate change stuff is not as much as it could be. And there's a lot that we can do that way. And to me, that's the important thing for us to understand is that this climate change thing might be affecting a whole lot of things that we think are very special. But we have to remember I was talking about how everything in the world is connected to everything else. It's our environment too. And it eventually it will come back to bite us too. That's the way it will work, because we are connected to everything else. And my money, this place is really still a place worth saving, because we have to find out what it's like when it's intact and what changes happen in a system that doesn't include us most of the time. Thank you very much for hanging in there. Appreciate it.